Hi, I'm Catherine Miller from WBBZ-TV. Welcome to this very special show. In place of Passionate Living tonight, we're going to honor someone very special to everyone here at the station, to all of you who've watched him through the years, and for me, who is sad at the loss of a very dear friend of almost 2 decades, Ed Asner, who is not just a remarkable actor, but a remarkable man. I'm in La Fortuna, Costa Rica right now as I found the news out about Ed. And I thought, what a perfect place to celebrate him, to share prayers, to be in this gorgeous rainforest near a volcano, because it's very symbolic of who Ed was. For those of us who knew him, Lou Grant was not a huge stretch in acting for Ed, because it was very much who he was. There was that sometimes volcanic exterior, that rough curmudgeon that we all knew, but we also knew that underneath that was this lush rainforest, was this very decent, loving, kind, intelligent, compassionate, and generous man. He did so much for the world around him and for everybody that came onto Ed's path. So we want you to sit back and get ready for a very heartfelt, very beautiful tribute to our dear friend, Ed Asner.
I'm John DeSciullo with WBBZ-TV owner Phil Arno, and here we are in our studio at Eastern Hills. And Phil, it was just in June of 2019, not that long ago, that we welcomed the great Ed Asner right here into this facility.
And what a terrific guy he was. Very down to earth. He just was a pleasure to talk to. And we had an experience with him that was so special. It wasn't a formal interview that you would get with a correspondent. He really talked about a lot of things that you don't normally hear about. And it was a pleasure to have him here in our studio.
It was terrific. He opened up about his career, his family, and he was here because the Jewish Repertory Theater welcomed him to Buffalo at that time. He was touring with his one-man show, A Man and His Prostate. Without further ado, as they say, Phil, let's remember the great Ed Asner.
What in the name of Sam Hill is that?
And just because of some arbitrary standards, then, you know, well, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
I hate spunk!
We are in the presence of a legend, everybody, here at WBBZ-TV. For many of us, we saw him in the movies back in the day with John Wayne and El Dorado, Elvis and Kid Galahad, and in the 70s with so many shows. But another character created in that era was Lou Grant, might be his most memorable from the Mary Tyler Moore Show and the Lou Grant series. But did you know that this man we sometimes think of as rough, tough, and gruff, and an outspoken political activist, he has a side that is as compassionate for others with a heart as big as the planet. Take a look.
It's so attractive about the Ed Asner Family Center is that they have programs not just for our kids or young adults, the people that have special needs, but also for their families.
This is a big deal, and this is, I think, the beginning of like what the world needs on the special needs level with the families, so that everyone can grow up in a place that's actually productive and not falling apart. Because right now, most families I know are falling apart.
This should be in every community in America. This should be all around the world. We should be providing people with arts enrichment and vocational enrichment and mental health services all around the world. This should be something that we all get to take for granted.
And the man behind the Ed Asner Center is, of course, Ed Asner, who we welcome to WBBZ-TV today. Mr. Asner, we're going to get to your storied career, but first, I want to thank the Jewish Repertory Theater with Jordana Halpern and Saul Elkin and their team, because they brought you here to Western New York with your one-man show, A Man and His Prostate. Our Catherine Miller is going to talk about that in a little bit. She saw the show, but let's get started, I guess, Ed, I wanted to start with the Ed Asner Family Center, because I think most people would start with your career, but I thought I would start with something that is big as I've ever seen a human being try to do. How did the center get started?
Well, it started through my son and his wife. And I was totally taken aback by it. I had no idea of starting something that presumptuous. And it turned out that it was welcomed everywhere because we have this definite tie to autism.
Tell us about that tie, because I
have an autistic son. My younger son is autistic, and my son, my older son, has a son who is autistic. He married a woman who has two sons who are on the high achievement element of autism. They both are brains. So we're surrounded by autism, which the world is so ignorant of that they have to learn about it. So our job is to teach them, to acquaint them, to get them to understand it's a speciality that needs to be treated.
When your son was born and diagnosed with autism, what was that like for you? How did you react?
Well, we didn't know what it was. I mean, he's 30, he'll be 32 in August. And what is it? I read about it, I heard about it. Well, how did it happen? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The research is zilch. And the most telling incident is for me, to acquaint law enforcement with the uniqueness of this handicap. He was 8 or 9, maybe, I think it was no more than 9. And we were in the car together, and he was in the passenger seat, and I committed an infraction. So I got the siren and pulled over, rolled down my window, waited for the cop to come to the window, and he's over and popping around in the driver's seat. And as the cop approaches the window, he leaps to the passenger side over me and says, "Do you know who you're talking to?" So that in the past would get some trouble. And our job is to inform enforcement that they're not responsible for utterances such as that.
And I know you mentioned in the video that's on the website, and by the way, the website will have that information up, but 80% of individuals who are challenged, who have a difficulty, are unemployed or underemployed. I thought that was an interesting statement that you made.
Yeah.
And your son, who's in the video clip we just saw, very passionate, and you have a lot of great things to say about your daughter-in-law, because she is as big a dreamer as I think you are in so many respects.
It seems her daddy was a phenomenal doctor who would go to the West Bank and teach Arab kids how to surf. That's a wild hook out of nowhere.
Right.
My daughter Liza is the mainspring of my existence, and she helps me catch the train on time.
But what was that experience like for you today to see one of the great cancer research institutes in the country?
Well, my show is about prostate cancer, or prostatitis anyway. And it's a funny show. And it's wonderful for me to see and meet all of these prostate cancer survivors, some who've been there 10, 12 years, but they're all living, working, smiling. So it's a good thing to have.
Well, we're blessed to have that research institute here. And Catherine, I know you saw the show, A Man and His Prostate.
Yes, last night.
When we're recording the show, his one-man show, Ed's show, was at the Jewish Repertory Theater.
Yes.
What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing. As only you could do it, Ed.
Well, I guess the question is, what do we find funny? What do we? That's Ed's growl, by the way.
Yes.
What do we find funny about prostate cancer?
It's the story. It's the journey. And if you haven't seen A Man and His Prostate, you should go out, find it in your area, and watch it, because it is an extraordinary journey through something that's very difficult, something that's obviously life and death. And the way that Ed takes you through that journey is just unbelievable. Tears and laughter. It's a great story.
So it's a one-man show, and it was written by somebody you...
Ed Weinberger, who was a writer-producer on Mary Tyler Moore.
Right. You've had a lot of collaborative efforts with him in the past. Do you have any new ones in the future?
Well, we're taking this show wherever. We're going to Ireland and England, as a matter of fact, to do this show in selected cities, about 8 performances. And we'll see how it responds in foreign lands.
What did you think of the Jewish Repertory Theater, our local theater?
That's very, very nice. I saw what they've been doing in terms of product, and it's exciting. It's very nice.
Well, we're happy to support them here at WBBZ.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, you know what? I know we have a full audience here, and I don't want to take this show over. I want the audience to participate. And we may be ping-ponging all around, Ed, from different things, from your career to family.
I have a movable head.
I don't have any hair, so I'm good. We'll start with this gentleman right here. Stand up. First of all, tell us your name and what's your question?
My name is Rob, and it's a pleasure to be in your presence.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work and entertaining me for all these years. I appreciate it. Not so much a question as a comment. A few years ago, my son had a school project that he wrote people of celebrity, asking them what inspires them. You wrote back very quickly to him, very personal, handwritten letter, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Very personal things, very well thought, and just shows your personality and the depth of your character. You ended it by telling him, kiss your grandparents for me. And I just thought that was beautiful, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. On his behalf, you couldn't be here.
Thank you
What's his
very
name?
much.
His name is Alex.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, maybe at the end you can get a selfie with Ed. You can take it back.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Well, let's talk about family a little bit, Ed, because you grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. What was that? What was your upbringing like?
Well, it was an Orthodox Jewish family. Well, I call it Midwestern Orthodox because they can't be as severe and as strict as they are in the East, in the heavy Jewish populations. But I went to school every day. I went to religious school every day after school. So I had to take a bus and a streetcar and then rode home with my dad at dark. Did that 4 days a week, went to Friday night services, which we were required to do, then Saturday morning services as I approached my bar mitzvah, and then of course there was Sunday school. So it was a heavy dose.
Your dad, I read, was a pretty tough. He was a pretty tough guy, loving but very
He's
focused.
loving, foreign born, but it was the prop that kept, it was the cord that kept the people going.
And your mom was very doting on you. You were the youngest of the family.
Yeah, I was youngest of 5.
Do you think that's where you got your fighting spirit from your ancestry? Because your ancestry is pretty
I
deep.
don't know. At the same time, my brother, who was 6 years older, used to beat the crap out of me. And I used to scream and holler, and my dad would then come up and beat the crap out of him. And so the circle goes, you know. We pass it from one to the other. So I learned to scream and shout and be a victim. And I as the youngest of 5, I said I wouldn't be a victim anymore.
You were not always an actor. You worked on the assembly line, I think at General Motors.
I did General Motors, I did Ford, I did the steel mills in Gary. So I drove a cab in Chicago.
And you served our country in the Army. Thank you. You served our country in the Army.
Oh yeah, I did 2 years.
Yeah.
And I did learn a lot.
But
I learned to survive.
What made you become an actor? I've heard your son talk about it, but I'll let you talk about it.
When I'm asked that question, I became an actor for one of 2 reasons. To escape my brothers punching me, and therapy. So you can call escape the same thing as therapy, but that's what acting became for me. A therapy to salve my wounds and go on. I was the baby, so I was spared a lot.
Do you think that you have been, we think, and I'm sure the audience would agree, that you've been given a gift. Do you think that you've been given a gift as an actor to do what you do?
Yeah, I do. I got a good voice. I did 3 Penny Opera in New York for 3 years. Sang it.
That was your first show in New York.
Yeah.
You know, one of the shows that we've talked about, and it's in an image in the monitor behind you, is the character of Lou Grant. And so many of us, and we're going to get to the audience questions after we show this clip, because I think of all the clips so many of us have seen, this one, I think, for me at least, is so iconic of who you are and what you're all about when you first meet Mary Tyler Moore. Let's take a look.
Oh, good.
Look, miss, would you try answering the questions as I ask them?
Yes, Mr. Grant, I will, but it does seem that you've been asking a lot of very personal questions that don't have a thing to do with my qualifications for this job.
You know what? You got spunk.
Well,
I hate spunk. Tell you what, I'll try you out for a couple of weeks, see if it works out. If I don't like you, I'll fire you.
Right.
You don't like me? I'll fire you.
Yes.
How about that, everybody? One of the classic moments.
I don't want to throw the lie in your face, but I want all of you to know I love spunk.
Well, we love you. Ed, we do a show here. We do a lot of old movies here on WBBZ-TV, and this is the host of one of the hosts of our late-night movie show, Offbeat Cinema. And I know, Jeff, you have a question.
Sure. Hello, Mr. Asner.
Hi.
Well, I wanted to ask you about working with one of my favorite directors, Howard Hawks, when you did El Dorado. And just as a follow-up, you also got to work with both Robert Mitchum and John Wayne in that same film. Just your thoughts on that, please.
My thoughts? Well, I was amazed that they wanted me and that I was qualified to fulfill the role. And my first day in Tucson, or Old Tucson as they called it, we went over the first scene, actually, with Hawks. And I suggested a word change here, a word change there. And Wayne was listening in, and I think he might have resented my pickiness. So the Hawks then said, well, Ed, we got a couple of hours before they're ready to shoot, so you can go back to your trailer or whatever. Okay, so I'm wandering around in a suit that I said was my Mary and Sam suit. And I'm wandering around, and I see this army of grips preparing the scene already. And I said, well, I better get going back towards there. And as I'm walking towards the locale of the shoot, Wayne is training his horse to walk backwards. And he's commanding a very high lead, and he looks out over me and says, where's that New York actor? He's looking beyond me, but he can see me fully. fully outfitted. And where's that New York actor? And as I approached, I said, you mean me? He said, and so that started the slight conflict of our first day of work. I later got Hawks very angry at me because I had a card game going in my desert motel room. It was a suite, actually, because I was bringing my wife and kids down. And he ordered me that because of that, he didn't get his sleep that night, and the noise. So he said that everybody had to show up at Old Tucson every night, whether they were working or not. And I said, and if I didn't like it, I could take the train or plane back to LA. I said, well, okay. So I showed up every night. Finally, Wayne's makeup man, Larry Butterworth, I didn't know what to do about appeasing Hawks, but he said he always found that if you write somebody a letter explaining what happened, it helps. So I wrote the letter with R.G. Armstrong, who was an English major. He helped me construct my letter, put it in the box at the mailroom of the hotel, the motel, and I stood there for several days, seeing the letter unmoved. And I said, finally, does he ever pick up his mail? And the guy said, well, sometimes he comes by, sometimes he doesn't. I said, see that he gets that letter, will you? He said, okay. So I show up at Old Tucson that night. I don't know what to expect. And I see Hawks coming around the corner. And he looks at me and he goes, Ed, thank you for your letter. And I said, oh, thank God. I was out of the doghouse.
That's great. Great story. Ed, how did you get the role of Lou Grant? Because I understand when you first read for the role, it didn't go as planned. You had to come back and read for it again.
Yeah, I read for the two producer writers, and they said, well, that's a very intelligent reading. I said, well, thanks. I said to myself, but it wasn't funny. So they said, when you come back to read with Mary, well, that's a good sign. We want to read in wild, wiggy, crazy, all out wild. And I said, I don't know how to do that. I said, well, why don't you have me do it that way now? And if I don't do it that way, don't have me back. I've never talked that way before or since. But they said, well, we got another appointment. All right, try it. So I read it that way, crazily. And they said, read it just like that when you read it with Mary. So, okay.
And the rest is history, as they say.
I did it that way with Mary, and they laughed appreciatively. Then years later, I found that after I left the audition room, Mary turned to them and said, are you sure? They said, that's your Lou Grant. Okay.
What was your relationship like with Mary Tyler Moore?
Excellent, excellent. We were buddies. She was loved and adored by everybody on the show. She accepted being unseasoned, so to speak, and treated like a high school cheerleader.
She was very special, as was the whole cast when you look at it. We have another question here, Ed, in the audience.
Hi, Ed. I'm Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this and having us here. As a child of the 70s, if someone said the word boss to me, Lou Grant would be what would come into my head. And as a boss now, I often like to think about Mr. Grant dealing with some of the things I deal with on a daily basis. And thank you for that inspiration, I guess.
Oh, thank you.
My question to you would be, research process for, what did it take to kind of get into that groove of doing a small town news team? What went into the creation of those characters?
Well, most of us felt inadequate. Ted, of course, was a failure at many stations before he came to WKRP or WJM. And Gavin was a failed novelist. Never got the inspiration to finish the book he was always working on. Sue Ann was Sue Ann. Phyllis was Lars's wife. So you can imagine what that was like. And Mary was a reject from her boyfriend who she was engaged to. So we were all losers. A wonderful bunch of losers is how I describe them. And we were, fifth in Minneapolis, which I think only normally had 4 ratings. But we qualified as number 5. So we were in Minneapolis. We made the best of what we could, and we learned while we were doing so.
We have a clip with you and Ted Baxter and Mary, and you were talking about the ratings. You just mentioned how the station was last in a market that you couldn't get any lower in.
No.
And in many respects, Ed, what that show did as far as television news was not too far from the truth, and probably is as to this day. So let's take a look at that clip where they talk about the ratings on the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Good.
For the past 3 years, our ratings have been week in and week out absolutely terrible. But lately they've started to slip.
What are you implying, Lou? That I'm going downhill, that I'm getting slipshod, that I'm losing my touch? I mean, if that's what you mean, why don't you come right out and say it?
You've gone downhill, you've gotten slipshod, and you've lost the touch.
Come on, Lou, be serious.
Mr. Grant, don't you think there's a little too much emphasis placed on ratings anyway?
Yeah, who cares if our ratings go down a few points?
Right, as long as the people keep watching.
How about that? That's terrific.
I hope you liked that first half hour, because we have another half hour to go. Talking with Ed was just a pleasure because he opened up and was very personal, and the reminiscence that we all went through, it was just, we got to ask him questions, the audience got to ask him questions. It was a very, very interesting night.
Interesting, and my favorite role with Ed was as Lou Grant, as news director on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I was a news director, and you worked in news as well. And maybe that half bottle of scotch under the desk is something that kept him going in that character. I don't know. It didn't help me.
One of the most unique things for an actor is to be able to play the same role in 2 different situations. And that's something I don't think has ever happened in Hollywood. So it was a feather in his cap to be able to take that role and transition it from a half-hour sitcom to an hour, more of a drama.
Yeah, it's great. And more with Ed Asner after this break on WBBZ-TV.